We made this.
Hello everyone and welcome to Pick Up a Podcast, the podcast about podcasters and podcasting. My name is Kurt North and welcome to Season 2. It's been a bit of a long time since we last had an episode out. It was over a year ago now. I did say in the final episode of last season that I would be back at the end of the year. That was the end of 2019, so I'm slightly delayed. The reason for that being is that I've been doing the Time Is Now podcast, the podcast about Millennium, for the We Made This Podcast network, which is the network that I'm on and the network that my guest is on. And this week we're going to be talking music, we're going to be talking numerous different things. We have in the form of the Pick a Disc host, Matt Latham. Hello Matt, how are you doing, mate?
I'm great, thank you very much, Kurt. Nice to be here.
Fantastic. Just before we do start, can you give us just an overview of what your podcast is and how long you've been doing it for? And then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the podcast later on. But just a general overview of what your podcast is.
It's basically someone who likes to hear why people like things, and I thought I'll narrow it down to music. Pick a Disc is a podcast about people's... Well, mainly it's like people's relationship to an album or like a collection of songs that they really, really like. Basically, guests will pick something that they want to talk about. I give it a listen ahead of time, and they come on, and I just talk about them in general, about why they wanted to talk about it, why they... At the moment, everyone's liked the albums that they've chosen to talk about, asking about why they like them, talk about the songs in general. Occasionally, we kind of drift into a slightly off-topic kind of related to a situation about it, and then we bring it back to the album again. And then they choose a song to go into a playlist. Just
as something that comes to mind. So with you saying that at the moment that people are putting albums that they quite like, are you going to do like a quantum leap on season 4 where you get the evil leaper where you're just going to start doing albums which people hate?
Yeah, the pedantic Quantum Leap fanboy in me really wants to correct you and say it's the 5th season, but
fifth season. I'm sorry. It's been a long time since I watched Quantum Leap. I must apologise.
It's 5th season for like an episode and 2-part episode. But anyway, this isn't a Quantum Leap podcast here.
No,
even though
although it might be the birth of one.
Yes, I think Tony's mentioned that before in the past. That'll be an interesting one. Generally, the idea for the podcast is that I'm much more of a very positive person, and I quite like talking about things that people like and like to recommend to other people more than anything else. Quite a lot of the stuff that I listen to in terms of podcasts, the majority of them are generally people talking about things that they quite like. Occasionally dips into stuff that they probably take the mickey out of, but it come to a point like several years ago where I found it quite draining just hearing people rant about things that they dislike, and at some point I'm like, there's so much like stuff to consume media wise, like TV and music and stuff, particularly TV in the past. Like people should just like find stuff they like, sit down and just watch stuff they like, and then it's a lot more nice for people to recommend stuff that they like.
Yeah,
and that's one of the key things with the podcast I found was that my history in music is a lot more insular and like in a bubble, and I kind of like miss a lot of or not listen to quite a lot of the more popular stuff. So it's kind of like a way for me to kind of discover bands that I've never really listened to. For example, I think there was this guy who came up on my first ever episode, I can't remember what his name, Nert Korth, I think his name was, who got me to listen to U2, and I've never listened to U2 before.
All right, I think I've heard about that band and that person as well. Yeah, definitely. For those who don't know, I was on the premiere episode, which does bring me to it. Now, we talked about Achtung Baby, which is one of my favourite bands growing up and still is to this day. But technically, it wasn't the very first episode, was it? I think you had a Backdoor pilot during the Pick a Flick days, wasn't it? Was that right?
Yes. This is where it gets slightly not too convoluted, but pick a flick. For those who don't know, our Lord and Saviour of the We Made This Network, Tony Black, who will be brought up quite a few times in the rest of this episode. You'd be sick of him by the next. You'd be sick of him by the end of it.
I'm really looking forward to this, because this is my backdoor way into finding out as much as I possibly can about our Lord and Master. So I'm going to love it.
Yeah, well, I have had permission to. I've had permission to talk about stuff. Not that kind of stuff. There's nothing juicy, unfortunately. So Daily Star and Daily Mail, I'm going to be bringing stuff about him. But he had one. It wasn't not his first podcast, and possibly not even his second podcast, but he had a podcast for a long while, quite a few years ago, called Pick a Flick, which I don't know if you ever caught it at the time it was on, or...
I didn't catch it at the time. I have listened to it subsequently, yeah.
Yeah. Basically, the idea with that was that people nominated films for Tony and a guest to watch. And so, like, people would say, "Oh, can you watch this film?" And then you go, "Oh, okay, well, what's that? I'll bring this guest on, and they can watch it." And they had about 2 films per podcast. And I did say to him, "Goes, oh, okay, I'm quite into music. I wouldn't mind seeing if it works with a music version." Someone suggested talking about Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, Murder Ballads, and I was like, "Oh, okay, I've never listened to that before." And like I was trying to think about what guest could I have, and the first person that came to mind is my mate Lee, who I know is actually a massive big Nick Cave fan. Will probably know a lot about the album, and I brought him on, and it was kind of good to actually have someone who was quite familiar with Nick Cave and the album in general to kind of bounce off, because I was with someone who was much more knowledgeable about them. And then I think that passed by and stuff, and I thought, okay, I might as well see if I can try and give it a go as a podcast. And this was all the way in 2015. So I think the one that went on the feed for Pick a Flick, and it is actually now is episode 11 of the Pick a Disc feed, because around the time it came out, I was in the middle of moving house, and that was always my backup.
Right, okay. Yeah.
So that was my backup. If that was posted, then that was, oh crap, I'm running behind schedule, and I used that. So that I didn't have to worry about trying to record a new episode whilst in the midst of trying to move house. But the original one, I think, was edited a bit longer, because I think Tony edited down to get it to a certain point. I think it was a bit longer than the one that's on the Pick a Disc thing to hear.
Right.
And I then actually did a second episode. And I'm pretty sure, actually, if you look in podcast directories, there's about 3 different Pick a Discs that show up. There's one with Murder Ballads, and the second episode, which is when I spoke to my friend Matt, also called Matt, about the Counting Crows, August and Everything After. That's still lingering in some directories, even though you can't listen to it anymore. It's a bit of a shame, because I was trying to get that one. And one from one from the first time hosting, my first host for this version, and the current version on Spreaker that we use for We Made This. And so we did the August and Everything After, and then I didn't do any more. I just kind of stopped, right. And I can't remember exactly why. I don't know. I think the episodes just ran too long, and I think the idea of perhaps just people nominating albums and me trying to find people that like them, just kind of, it was a bit, I don't know, there was like trying to, so-and-so's nominated this album, who do I know that might be able to bounce off and have a conversation off? And
right.
It just kind of dropped on the wayside, and but I've always had the format in my head.
Yeah.
In my head and stuff, and jumping a few years a bit later down the line, I was listening to a few podcasts, and the format of them kind of brought the idea back in my head. But the thing that clicked was that the idea that, oh, hang on, if the guest picks the album, then that's one administrative hurdle that I won't have to bother about.
Yeah, it's almost like an epiphany, isn't it? That
yeah.
You suddenly went, oh, hang on a second, if you get Kurt to talk about Achtung Baby,
yeah.
then, and I have no idea what it's about, then, you're going to have at least one half the conversation's going to work, isn't it? So, and I think that comes a lot with this podcast as well, the fact that, I try to listen and try to research. I've listened to, obviously, a lot of yours anyway, because of the nature of what you do, but some of the episodes that I've done or will do, they don't necessarily line up with what my interests are. So I do listen to them from from that point of view, and sometimes I look more at the technical detail or whatever. But it's but having that influence of people who are podcasters want to naturally talk about their podcast. It, for me, is something that works really well because you let them speak, and I think that really kind of really works in that way, that I ask the probing questions and just let them do what they need to do. And it's similar with a lot of podcasts that I've been through. So you were mentioning this podcast that you're doing now, Pick a Disc, is the as you've tweeted quite often, is the longest running podcast that you've ever done.
Yes.
So by quite some stretch. So how many episodes did you get to before this level? And then also what influenced you into getting into podcasting, and two, kind of having and your podcast influences. What was your first podcast that you'd ever heard, or podcast that you would listen to, and what really brought you into this kind of genre of podcasting and the podcasting world?
It's that Tony Black person again. His fault.
His fault. He's got a lot to.
He's got a lot to answer for.
He has, hasn't
he? Because he's always been into like the criticism of stuff, and I think he really got into kind of film criticism.
Yeah.
And I can't remember how he got into it, but I do know that in the past, because of an online community we was involved in, we had I think we've attempted a podcast or audio Skype conversations recorded for other members of the community to listen to, and what happened then, he started to write, I think, for a blog, I think, and then started to record it, and he came up with the concept of a show. Well, concept of the show is basically just a movie review podcast, but he called it Black Hole Cinema because Tony is nothing but wanting to put his name on things. To be fair, I'm quite surprised that We Made This doesn't have a part of his name in it.
There's no anagram in there either, is there?
No, there isn't. No.
But I suppose, it is the X-Files, kind of play on the X-Files, at the end of their show, isn't it? So
yeah,
We Made This, a network from Tony Black.
Yes, Tony Black presents. Tony Black presents. We Made This presenting. Tony Black presents. We made this production. Pick a Disc. But no, he did Black Hole Cinema, where he'd probably watch a film and basically record himself. Like, I think it was pretty much, he just had his Mac open, press record, and used the microphone of the Mac on there. And I think he had, I can't remember when he tried Skype concept. I don't know I can't remember how he did it, because I forgot. I haven't listened to the first episodes in so long, but it was just basically him like kind of talking at his laptop. And I think then he started having guests. Now I can't remember if they had Skype conversations in or not, but I do know that in the early days that I'd drive to his house, pick him up, we'd go and watch a film, right, and then we'd probably go back to his house, he'd open up the laptop, and we'd just be talking around his laptop about the film we'd watched. He'd post them up onto the website, and I'm pretty sure there was only about 2 or 3 people that were listening to him at the time, and one of them was me, and God knows if he put up with it or not, but pretty much every time that he'd post a new episode, guaranteed I have a text message saying, yeah, you really need to do this, it sounds crap. The audio quality is naff, you need to do something. Like, for God knows how many months, every time he'd post an episode, I'd be tweeting him, mate, what if you try this? What if you try this? What if you try this? Because he doesn't sound that well. Because you can hear the fan of your laptop going off and stuff. And but how the hell he just didn't give up, because I just seemed to be negative on him. But it came from a place. But to be fair, it came from a place of love and constructive criticism, because to his credit, Tony did actually start to eventually start thinking more about the technical side of stuff. And then I think he then started going through connecting with people on Twitter, and like connecting with other film podcasts. The one that comes to mind is a podcast called Failed Critics, which was run by a guy called Owen Hughes and Steve Norman. And Owen Hughes becomes quite key in another part of my podcast history in a second. And I think he then started recording Skype conversations, found a Skype recorder. I think he brought an actual microphone, and just started to develop stuff. And then I think that at that point, Black Hole Cinema, he kind of got bored with Black Hole Cinema, and then developed Pick a Flick that we mentioned before.
Right.
And I do remember, I think on his third, I think like the third or fourth episode, myself and my other friend went to his house, and I'm pretty sure it might have been on 2015 in October. Yes, because it was the same day as the Birmingham Half Marathon, because it was the year before I ran it for the first time, because we was trying to drive to his, and we had to pretty much drive all the way around the marathon route, get stuck in traffic, and was about an hour late. But I used a Zoom 4N recorder with 2 karaoke mics that I bought cheaply that morning from Argus, plugged into the bottom. So I don't. If you don't know the Zoom 4N recorder, portable recorder at all, there's a microphone at the front that you can use, and you've got 2 line inputs you can do, and you can actually separate the line inputs at the bottom to left and right. So what we ended up doing, we had Tony talking into a stereo recording at the front, myself and the other friend Matt talking into these really crap £10 karaoke mics going into left and right. So Tony had 3 separate track recordings, and that was the first time he ever had multiple recordings to edit. And I know that because he started moaning at me saying, this is taking too long, I've got it in Audacity, it's going to take forever. And it turns out that he didn't realise there was an option called sync tracks.
Right.
And I think that was because about a month or so earlier, myself, him, and another friend, Lee, who was actually on the Murder Ballads podcast, attempted my first podcast that I tried to do.
Right.
Where I got them to record locally theirs and bring their things in, and I thought, I'll try this I thought I'd try the multi-track editing for the first time, and it worked out quite well, quality-wise. So I got him to try and to do that. So I've got a feeling the Tony's position on local recording might have come from me as well.
Okay, I mean, I've noticed in conversations that we've had over the last 18 months or so that you do generally have a good technical knowledge. Does that come from? Where's that kind of come from? From is it how you work? Is it something that you've done in the past, or how does that technical knowledge come from? Or is it you just naturally techie and geeky that you just want to do what I do, which is play around with stuff? Yeah,
that more or less that. Right. Yeah, because I'm pretty much my day job is tech support, and if there's anything that can be done quicker and automated, I will try and find it. And there's a lot of fun in experimenting and trying to get stuff working to make things either better or quicker, or to try and improve the quality of something. Yeah. So, and it's the same thing as well, because I'd hear other podcasts at the time, and they sound a lot better, and I'm nothing like a audio professional. In fact, there's I only know how to do a few presets in Audacity. All the technical jargon just goes over my head. Yeah. But I always quite like to learn and trying to improve stuff. I mean, I've currently been staring at on Amazon a shock mount and a desk stand, just because to limit the noise that appears, like the vibrations of my desk. Because at the moment, my Yeti mic is on a towel, just to reduce the amount of vibrations that happens. Because if I leave the mic on the table, all you hear is the hum. And
right, yeah. You will love this. That when we were at X-Fest, we took the obviously the podcast on the road, and it was quite a difficult one to do, because we found an area just right outside the hotel, and I think it was the first or second day of recording that the amount of background noise was absolutely incredible. There was just road noises, there was trucks turning up everywhere, and because I was using a new piece of software, it was really difficult to get rid of that, and it had actually enhanced it in a lot of ways. So in some ways I would have liked to have gone back to Audacity, but because we were doing multi-track recording at the time, we had 3-4 mics set up at the same time. And one of the aspects was that we were standing at a glass table, and to help with exactly what you've just said there about the shock mount and stuff, and you're having it on a towel and stuff, I took the bath mats that had like these suckers on the actual bath mats themselves and lay them out on the table. So God knows what people were thinking when I was walking down with these bath mats just to go and lay them on this table so I could put all the microphones on, which was it was genius. But the rest of the Xcast crew were particularly enamoured by these bath mats being used as shock absorbers. So that was fantastic.
Yeah.
So you mentioned, obviously, Tony is obviously a big element in what you were doing and how you were doing it. And I can see that potentially that both of you would push each other in separate ways. So like obviously the technology side of things that you were pushing him, and what was the main kind of focus on? How did you really kind of come together to form that kind of relationship that you were able to do that? Was that something that you've known each other for so long that you've just got that rapport and you were pushing each other, or was there other external factors?
Whenever I say anything positive about the Xcast, it weirds him out.
Does it? Right, okay.
Yeah, he'll go to me and goes, "It's weird when you're nice." It's that kind of relationship that we have.
Right. Okay.
I think the closest analogue would be, I don't know if you've ever seen the John Cleese at Graham Chapman's funeral. With one of the best eulogies ever, where he just basically goes up and goes, "I want to say some good things about that, but no, I thought he was a freeloading bastard and I'm glad he's gone." And that was John Cleese about Graham Chapman. And I'm pretty sure that, not to be too dark, but I'm pretty sure that if either of us was giving a eulogy on the other, that would probably be how it would go.
Right, okay.
Yeah, it's that kind of relationship. But no, I love him to bits, but it's one of those one kind of relationships where it's kind of weird where we kind of complement each other, even though I quite a bit considering of what he's done with like the Xcast, it is done that. But I've known him for absolutely years. I've known him since about 2004.
Yeah.
No, 2005. But I've known him online. But I knew him online for about 3 or 4 years before I actually met him.
Right.
In real life. So and. I was about 14. In the year 2000, I traced it back. I was part of a Buffy fan forum called the Buffy Guide, and they had a community called the Watchers Diary, or the Watchers Diary.
Okay.
Or the Watchers Guild, I can't remember. But they also had a section called for fanfic, and considering reading fanfic and stuff, I decided to write a piece of Buffy fanfic myself. However, I wrote it as a part 1 thing, and I remember it was called Hartley, and it was about a young Watcher. And if anyone's familiar with Buffy or not, Watchers are like basically Anthony Stewart Head played the guide, the father figure / mentor for the main
Giles,
character.
wasn't it?
Yes, Giles. Yes. Yeah. He was called the Watcher, and the Watchers had this council in England and stuff. And my idea for fanfic was like there's this young Watcher in training who suddenly gained superpowers and basically ripped, and the whole thing was like a rip-off of Buffy, but based in a British countryside town. So, and I wrote that, but then like after that I decided to hang on. I was really into television and the idea of writing. I remember sitting down in my Year 9 careers interview saying I want to become a screenwriter, and so I decided. So I had the idea of somehow writing transcripts of fictional episodes of this fanfic. So if this fanfic idea was a TV series, so it was called Hartley, there was an ensemble cast, so I wrote a pilot which was like a transcript thing where it's not exactly a script, it's more like basically you got like all the dialogues on one line, and you got like it's more like how a play's written. And I wrote that, and of that I wrote about 10 episodes worth of that. Well, no, it was 9 because someone else wrote an episode which plays a big part of that. And basically it turned. Eventually, I've learned that what I was doing was being part of something what's called virtual series. Now, I'm not sure if you know the term or not.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of the virtual seasons of like Millennium and X-Files and various other things. Yeah, so I'm aware.
Yeah. So basically, it's like where you got like fanfic or original series, and they release things up in an episode format. And a friend of mine that I made through this Buffy community was a guy called Mark, or he was known as Bad Fur Day at the time. Saw what I did with Hartley. He wrote an episode of it actually, and sent me like 2 Word documents of about 14 pages each of a prose story. but it was written as a 2-part pilot, and it was a thing called Ravenshill. And it was basically about witches and werewolves in like this fictional British town.
Right. So were these written in like screenplay format, or were they just like sort of written in more of a fan fiction story, like short story thing? Or
they're short stories, yeah. So, but this was prose,
right?
So this was in prose format, and I think, and then like I really got into it like this, and he ended up writing quite a bit of it, quite a few episodes. I created a website and posted up all these on a website, and I think I wrote a couple, and then we finished the first season of about 13 of them. We did a second season of 24 episodes, which I wrote a few. We had a third writer who wrote a couple as well. There was a third season of 32 episodes, and God knows what was on at that time. Then we had about a 20-episode fourth season to finish it, and eventually we spent about 3.5 years working on this online fiction thing. Now, what I always quite find with this kind of thing was that everyone who dabbles in it first thinks they might have accidentally discovered it themselves, like we did. Right, and then it was like about 2003, 2004. I found some online communities. There was an online community called Epiguide, which was more based about ongoing like serial dramas that people would write up, but it was all like US soap stuff. But there was willing and accepting for us to support stuff on there, and on that message forum, and this was 2004, someone posted up on there, like, I really like Ravenshill, I really like the character of Adam, he wears a Limp Bizkit hoodie, I have a Limp Bizkit hoodie as well. And now the Limp Bizkit bit might give you a hint of who that person was. That was Chris Wilson, who's the co-host of Without a Mouse. Now, I actually met him online before I even met Tony, so I've known him for about 17 years online. And then eventually there was someone posted up about a vampire drama that was original vampire drama that was writing in a script format.
Right.
It was called Something in Between, and the guy who wrote that was a guy called Lee, who would then who's the same Lee who was on the Murder Ballads podcast, and he had this online community of like screenwriters, and he was UK based. In fact, he was down the road from me actually. He was Wolverhampton based, so he was kind of local lad, a few years older than me though. And he goes, "Oh yeah, we did this, and I came to this place, and this place was called MZP, which was Monster Zero Productions, which then became, for about 6 or 7 years, became my main community, and I eventually became one of the key admin and like leaders of the community. After being there from about 6 months, there was this someone joined who called himself Blackster47. I think it was a reference to, I think, Alias. I think number 47 is a reference in Alias, I think. And he was a local boy as well, from but Birmingham based, and his name was Tony. And eventually what happened, the community was then starting to generate these original pieces of like scripted fiction, and one of the key things that Tony worked on was, and I never wrote for, but I only read about 2 seasons worth of a 5-season thing that he managed to fit over 5 years, was a series called the DSR, and basically it was a virtual spin-off of Alias.
Right, okay.
Yeah, so
that makes sense.
Yeah, so he actually wrote a 5-season show of this spy supernatural drama called the DSR, based in the Alias universe, and which had like the character of Joseph Kendall with Terry O'Quinn, played by Terry O'Quinn, in it, and the idea basically being that this DSR would go on spy missions involving supernatural stuff. I never worked on it. I worked on a couple of my own, which never really got anywhere. I had quite a few aborted attempts of stuff, which I won't go too much into detail with because they only lasted about 5 or 6 episodes. But yeah, and then like Tony would work on other things, and we just got on really well. I ended up reading a lot of stuff. I used to review a lot. Tony used to work on other projects as well. We actually met in real life, became quite close friends from that, and then. And I think basically got in the habit of kind of reviewing each other's work, and we was always quite honest and critical about it, because the idea being is that we kind of wanted to see what people think, and if there was things that we didn't think would work, we'd mention them, and with the idea of being, well, to give them something to think about. And Tony was always kind of like very honest and blunt and to the point. If he didn't like something I'd written, he'd be completely honest, and like I'd go and cry in the corner for about an hour, but and never write again. But yeah, and I don't know if anyone is listening who's ever been part of a community or sees me and Tony on Twitter or anything. There was part of this thing. There was like a spin-off of the DSR that someone else was working on. And like one of the things they used to say was, "Oh, you don't have to have read the DSR to be able to read this." And whenever anything Tony related and it happens now, the first thing I always ask is, "Well, do I have to read the DSR to read it?"
Right, okay.
So yeah, and every time that happens, I ask that, and that's just become one of the longest running jokes between me and him ever. So that kind of love of writing and creativity of each other, and kind of the drive to try and improve each other's writing, kind of stemmed from that. And I think that kind of bluntness and the willing to be able to critique each other, like turned into kind of matey banter, for lack of a better word. And that relationship just kind of developed to me. And there's not many people that can insult him and get away with it.
Right, so we know which way to go. Then I'll be on the phone to you. No, let's sort that out.
Yeah. It's one of those things that goes like, no one can insult him, but only a certain few people. So,
thank you for that. It's a really good insight into both yourself and Tony to a degree there as well. So coming back to yourself then, so you've got this relationship with Tony, and you've done all this script work and the stories that you've done with regards to that online community. Where did podcasting fit in with you? Where did that kind of spawn from, and where was the desire to do that, and what kind of can you remember your first kind of podcast that you were listening to around that time that kind of made you want to go down that route?
I think the first kind of podcast I think I remember being on properly was Black Hole Cinema, and I kind of like, but Tony was very much into the cinema side of it, and I'm not really much of a film buff, if I'm honest. The only times I seem to watch films is at the cinema. It's quite rare that I'll sit down and watch a film. I am much more a TV connoisseur, for lack of a better term. Particularly before then. I mean, I'll go to live music and stuff, but my first kind of like real key love, I think music's kind of taken that over that now, but or it's 50-50, is that I am really into TV. I used to watch a lot of it around 2005 or 2006. I actually had a website, like a blog, called The Bottle Episode, which was basically TV, me reviewing TV. But very, very quickly, I discovered that, because I was watching quite a lot of TV and trying to watch a lot of pilots, what I found was that I wasn't having fun when I was kind of reviewing stuff that I didn't like. Right. So if there was something I didn't like, I decided not to write about it. Instead, if there was stuff that I really liked, I thought, oh, this is really good. I'll say why I liked it and why I recommend it to other people. And that's the blog started becoming a lot more positive about that. A lot of that is influence. I think a lot of that influence was from a website called The Grey Estates, which is a music blog which is run by Lauren Rearick, I think it was. Oh, God, if Lauren ever listens to this, I'm really sorry if I've mentioned the name wrong. The main thing is like promoting women and non-binary musicians, but the kind of editorial stance is that it's always kind of people being positive about stuff, and that kind of like had quite an impact on me as well. Anyway, particularly when I started to do more of the Bottle Episode. And I think because of the TV stuff, and I think Tony was just a lot more into the film side. A few times he dipped into TV, and whenever he tried to dip into TV, we pick a flick or anything special wise, he often asked me, because I was biggest TV nut that he knew, and because of that, I thought, okay, I might try and see if I can do something TV wise. And I think around this time I started listening to podcasts, about 2015. At the start, there was a few that I really got into. There was one that's still going to this day, but it's kind of dipped because is the TV Talk Machine, which is a guy called Jason Snell and Tim Goodman, who was the former chief TV critic at the Hollywood Reporter. All right. Okay. But this was like a long running one that I just got into and pretty much binged the majority of it before catching up. But they always talked about TV, and that kind of was influence. Another one at the time was one called the Retro Hour, it's about retro gaming and TV. No, just retro gaming, sorry. But they always have someone interviewed and talked, so it was a lot of it was an interview-based one. And the other one was one called Wiki Shuffle, which was like a comedy podcast where like three friends would just basically go on random Wiki Shuffle articles by clicking the shuffle button. And,
right, yeah.
And they just and it turned out it's one of the funniest things, and it's not going anymore, and I miss it immensely. But it was one of the funniest things I've ever listened to, and it was probably one of the reasons I'm still into podcasts today. But that kind of stuff around that time, kind of thought, I might have a go at doing my own thing, and I just thought my initial thought was perhaps having kind of like a topical TV podcast tied into the Bottle Episode website, and the Bottle Episode lasted one episode, because it turned out
it lasted one episode.
Yes, yeah, it lasted
right, okay.
one. Yeah, because it turned out we talked a lot, and by the time I finished editing it was an hour and 45 minutes. And just the long. If I'm looking at a podcast and someone says, "I'll recommend this podcast," and if the podcasts are stupidly long episodes each,
yeah.
Personally, I will end up skipping it, with perhaps a few exceptions, but the shorter the podcast episodes, the more likely I am to listen to it. And I remember going back, I can't do this on a regular basis, and kind of just like lost the will for it. And then during that, I think Pick a Flick was still doing well. I ended up doing the Pick a Disc pilot. I did the Pick a Disc 2 episodes, and that kind of fell on the wayside again. And I can't remember what I was listening to, but I've always had an idea. I always quite liked the concept of people talking about what they like or why they like things, and I think that gets, and I think you can feel that kind of impact in Pick a Disc itself, where I quite like listening to stories of how they did. One of my favourite things about the podcast is the question of how do they discover the band they saw, and particularly live stories or that kind of stuff. At that time, I was perhaps more leaning towards TV back then, and there was I can't remember where the idea came up on, but the concept of TV taste genealogy, that term popped in my head.
Right, okay, as it does.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I'm pretty sure people listening to this now are going, "Oh, finally he's mentioned that." I was waiting for him to talk about TV genealogy. But the idea being was that, and this works with music as well, but probably not to the extent in Pick a Disc as this idea did, where, like, if you look back at the TV shows you like from now and trace it back, there are either common threads or there might be ways that they tie in together.
Yeah.
And with that, I came up with the idea of another podcast called Your Perfect TV Show, or The Bottle Episode Presents Your Perfect TV Show, where I'd interview someone, and the idea being is that they would pick 4 TV shows, that 4 of their favourite TV shows across their life. The only catch is they cannot be on at the same time. And then I'll just talk about them for about 5-10 minutes, about why they liked it, why they liked the next one, etc. So, for example, I think the third episode was from the second or third episode I did was Tony.
Yep, I've got a picture. Is this the time when I need to look at this picture?
Yes.
Okay. Just so people can understand that he's got a kind of call sheet, I would call it, with various different things on it. So do you want to explain that while you're talking about this episode as well, just so we can give some context, and we might even, if with your permission, obviously, we might even tweet that out when the episode airs. So
yeah, well, before I quickly go on to that, so for example, Tony was like talking about, at the time it was Game of Thrones, then it was Lost, then it was Alias, and then it was the X-Files.
Right, okay.
And he talked about why they liked it, why they did that. And as I was interviewing, I was scribbling notes like crazy. And then the second part of the podcast, which is based on this image that you're looking at, was that the title of the podcast, Your Perfect TV Show, was that I was going to go on the fly using elements of the 4 TV shows that people picked, try and come up with the perfect TV show for the guest in question.
Right, okay.
So, and I mean, there are like, what you haven't seen is about the A4 pages of notes that I've scribbled in the 40 minutes I was talking about time. And then pretty much what you're looking at is, like, from Tony, was that is, I can't remember if it was titled, possible title, Paradise. And basically asking him questions about his favourite show. Like, for example, Ronald D. Moore was his showrunner. It would be on Netflix, a political spy fantasy in a pulp retro sci-fi world. So, like, using Tony's example again, was picking stuff about, he liked the fact there's a wide ensemble, epic backstory, a complex storytelling, there's high production values, there's like a lot, because he's also very much into his like wide mythology and all that kind of stuff, which particularly with Game of Thrones, and a lot of that is shown up in Lost as well. So like a lot of wide mythology, the bigger picture of slow burning mystery. Same with Alias as well. But Alias had kind of like a pulp storytelling and a long form storytelling, as he said. There's stuff about families that he quite liked. There's complex storytelling. The X-Files, the mystery, the mystery of not knowing the whole truth and unveiling of a mystery, which again you see in Alias, you see in Lost, or particularly in Lost, bloody hell. And again, and like perhaps not as much as in Game of Thrones, but there are common threads in that tie together, and the idea being was that I then created, like, on the fly, as I said, like a perfect TV show for Tony, which was about it was basically like a fantasy, but it was based in a pulp sci-fi world. So if you think about, I don't know, something like Fallout, the Fallout games, but not post-apocalyptic. Like, for example, there's like a government agent played by Terry O'Quinn. There's a daughter played by Kristen Ritter, who's part of like a rebellion. Jensen Ackles plays a rogue agent. I can't remember the context of it, if I'm completely honest. But but there's like a father and daughter element to it. But I think the idea being was that the father was the main character in a flip of like Alias.
I mean, I particularly like the fact that Terry O'Quinn's in there, Kristen Ritter's in there.
Yeah, and then but basically, I think what we found as well is because particularly of out the 3 episodes we did, I think because of the background that myself and Tony found in terms of like story pitching, we ended up kind of pitching this like whole mythology live on the recording. So we came up with the idea of this like alien, like controlling shadow alien conspiracy called the Echelon in the background of it and everything, and it was a lot of fun. But again, that was the last episode I did, and that lasted 3 episodes. So by the time that the 4th episode of the Pick a Disc came in, I tweeted that it was the longest running podcast I've ever did, and I really enjoyed doing the bottle episode because I remember having, I think, Jack from Wikishuffle, the one I mentioned on, and we talked to, I can't remember the name, can't remember much of the show that we did, but I know it was a combination of that kind of stuff. I think Owen Hughes from the Failed Critics podcast was a guest as well. I think he was the first guest actually, and I know Alan Partridge was one of his shows. I can't remember what his other ones were, but but he was very much in. There's a bit of journalism because I think he was quite a journalist himself.
Right.
And we pretty much. And I know the show that we had was called Hack, and basically had Steve Coogan starring as a journalist who had the ability to kind of hack into like the communications network. So he had the ability to, like, if he put his hand in like a terminal or a phone line or something, he'd be able to tap into and eavesdrop on people.
Right.
Yeah, but again, I really liked it, but logistically, it was quite a long recording session.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, there's a lot to both think about and on your feet and to do. I mean, in some ways, it's a bit like Whose Line Is It Anyway, in some ways, isn't it? So
yeah, and recording sessions went on too long. The editing was just a lot long, and particularly trying to work on the fly as well. There was like about a gap of 10 minutes where I tried to rush an idea and was kind of brainstorming and. I know for a fact that Tony still loves the idea. I still love the idea. I just think it's very time consuming to do.
Yeah,
and
it's the sort of thing that you'd want to do, like sort of maybe 2 or 3 times a year, or even once a year, isn't it? Really, and just have a special every year for it.
Yeah,
rather than like a full series of it, because I can imagine that being really difficult over the course of maybe more than 5 episodes, really.
Yeah, and It was quite a lot. I think it was supposed to be like monthly or something. I think it was like monthly apparently at one point. And I mean, I really enjoyed doing it, and it was a lot of fun. It's just a lot logistically during it, trying to work it out. I mean, perhaps it was done over 2 sessions where you do the first bit, where you talk about stuff, and then perhaps a week later record the second bit after coming up with an idea and stuff. But again, that's just too much. That's just like too much administrative work and too much time to devote for it, I think. But
I love a high concept, and that certainly is a high concept.
And I mean, like it's the podcast idea that got away. But so
well, anyway, so coming after that, obviously, you Pick a Disc is where you've landed, and you found your feet with it, and you mentioned the Limp Bizkit already, which we'll mention. I believe that's your highest rated episode, I believe.
Yeah, and it's the only one where I've not been completely positive about the album, which is
ironic.
It's kind of annoying that the ethos of the podcast and the most popular one doesn't go to it. But to be fair, if anyone other than Chris, the guest, I probably wouldn't have got away with that. But I mean, there was some parts of it I was quite positive about. But coming back full circle, I mean, Chris was he's like the fifth guest on the episode, but I do quite like. I think I found a format that works for me.
Yeah, well, that was going to be one of my next questions. Is that you started off with a few ideas, and some of them have fell by the wayside a little bit, like sort of the ranking and things. How did you find that as you were finding your feet? Do you feel that you've got now you've got a good body of work behind you, that you found the format that you particularly like?
Yeah, I mean, I think like the ranking bit is probably the only thing that's dropped about 7 or 8 episodes in. But I mean, I think I know the point, and I know the episode where I've suddenly realised that this works properly. This is going to go. I can probably see myself lasting a lot longer than the other ones do, and that was actually quite early on. That was the 3rd episode.
Right.
That was episode 3 when I spoke to Helena about Phoebe Bridgers. Because there was the first episode that we did, which was fun, but as like testing the pilot for an episode, that is just basically testing out and stuff. And I think I re-listened to that, and it's quite shocking actually how much of the structure is actually still in place.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, quite the structure still in place. It's actually the structure is actually quite solid and kept for the most of it. A lot of the key questions that anchor the structure of the podcast are still there, like how did you find this episode, what do you like, what you not, have you seen them live, etc. But I think then you had like this Say Anything, and that was me just like, okay, I've got one episode in, and I'm interviewing my friend Kaylee about stuff and about Max Bemis and Say Anything, and that was the one where I think where the concept of having like the slightly off tangent bit kicks in, because not the tangent off topicness is still related, because I think we had a nice chat, and I particularly learned something about bipolar disorder, because I think that because Kaylee shared her experiences with that, and because the lead singer of Say Anything also has the same as well, and we kind of dipped into talking about that briefly before coming back to the album and relating it back to the album. And then the third album kind of like just felt like, okay, I've got those two, I know what I'm doing with this. And then as I was chatting to Helena, we kind of like just chatted about the album. We then went on to that slightly off topical stuff about the structure and building of like an album, and then like, because Helena was a singer-songwriter herself, it kind of worked well with the topic we was talking about. And I came off and finished after that recording session, I was like, yeah, this is actually this works. I'm quite happy with what I'm doing. I don't feel drained. I don't feel like I did with Your Perfect TV Show. I feel like I've got a massive administrative task ahead of me. This has worked. And aside from pretty much forgetting to talk about the artwork on like every episode, even though it's always in my notes. Yeah. It's always in my notes, and I always talk about I've talked about the artwork in about 5 episodes out of like 26 so far. I think it's worked really well. It's kept quite rigid, and a few times we've experimented, like particularly at the end of last year, we've experimented with I've experimented with the thing with stuff. For the 25th episode, I decided to try and do like a thing where I just listened to an album that was voted on by Twitter.
Yes, yeah, I remember doing that one.
Yeah, and I was talking for 40 minutes, and
that was James Blunt, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah, and it'll probably be a while before I try and do that again. But then I like the Christmas episode, but that was like a collection of Christmas songs rather than the Christmas album. But it was somewhat more similar in line to the rest of the episodes, and it just seems to work. I mean, like I've had bonus episodes at the end of the year where I'm just talking briefly about my favourite albums, and I've had guests. I've had like people record stuff from other podcasts to talk about their favourite albums, which I think that quite worked quite well. So I'm going to do that again next year.
Yeah, hopefully I'll get on that next year. This year was obviously last year was a particularly tough time trying to get anything in with the amount of workload that I had. But I was hoping to get one in, but I didn't. But I'll probably do that earlier in the year for September, October time, and have that ready. this time,
like for the start of this year, I've come back and we're back into the original kind of format stuff. So like people talking about stuff, and like the 30th episode is coming up, which I recorded at the time recorded a few days ago ahead of time, which is pretty good because I'm usually really rubbish at recording ahead of stuff. Yeah, and occasionally every 10 episodes I kind of treat myself with me picking the disc and getting a guest host, which so far I think's worked quite well. I believe, because I think you was the first one to.
Yeah, we did Kate Nash, didn't we? That was a good episode. That.
Yeah, not had much feedback on that yet. Not much feedback on that yet, and it turns out that my picks are the least listened to out of the least downloaded out of a lot of them so far.
But I think that's only fair though that you've got something the way you can, and I think probably you think about it that you're bringing guests on who will have an actual fan base that are coming to you. So the people who are listening to your podcast are people who are going to listen to your podcast anyway, and your guest isn't bringing anyone specifically to you in some ways because they're not talking about their album or them in a lot of ways. So I can see the reasons for it. So talking, you mentioned there about the having recorded in advance, and you're generally not that good at that. Has there been any real like short scrapes where you're trying to get an episode out really with the time ticking at all?
At the time of recording, my next episode will be recorded about 3 days before it's due to air, and it hasn't been aired yet. It hasn't been recorded yet. The only instance was that I think pretty much last year was that I think because of issues, I think one of my guests had to delay, which meant that I recorded the episode that was due to go on the Tuesday on the Monday, and I think I spent it was the longest marathon session because of editing on the Tuesday, and I managed to get the episode out on the Wednesday.
Right. Okay.
That's the only real kind of close call that I've had. I think the James Blunt, I think, was mainly because I think it was coming up towards around the Christmas time, and I was a bit under the weather anyway, and I didn't have any guests or podcasts coming up because it was the 25th. I thought I'll experiment anyway, so I used that as an excuse to give something as that out, but as an experiment. I don't know if it worked or not, but other than that, nothing too much. I mean, I think a lot of it is probably to do with confidence. So I am rubbish at talking to people about coming on the podcast. I usually think, I need to ask that and ask them, and it takes about 2 weeks to send a message to build the confidence up to ask them and stuff.
I totally get that. I mean, I'm in some ways this kind of arena doesn't scare me as such, but I do struggle with thinking, are they going to come on? Are they not going to come on? I'm getting a little bit better with that, but that's a particular struggle of mine as well. That you just think, oh well, that person's got more than 2,000 followers, and I don't know if they'll do anything. But I'm starting to get a bit better with that. But it is difficult. It is because you just don't know what response you're going to get, and then you get someone called Tony who just sort of has no fear.
Yeah,
and, you know what I mean. So I think that is my main struggle, and especially as it's same with yourself. I think it is a difficult one to gauge, really.
Talking about confidence as well, I think one of the reasons I think I wanted to do this as well, and actually one of the things I forgot to mention was that Owen Hughes and Tony, they created a website called Set the Tape.
Yes.
Which is basically like a review site, and they had a podcast out, like a magazine podcast where they talk about stuff, and it was every 2 weeks, and it was around about 2017. It was actually at Tony's wedding. I'm pretty sure I spoke to Owen about perhaps doing something to do with music, and for about half a year I had a 2-minute segment where it was just me talking about random stuff about to do with music on that. And I remember starting it, and I think as I was going on I felt more confident, and I think that my skill on the mic, sounding like a rapper, was improving as well. And I think one of the key reasons that I wanted to do the podcast was that it, of course, also gets me out of my comfort zone. Now I've been on other podcasts. I'm like a regular podcast guest on a show called Always Hold On to Smallville, about the TV show Smallville. But one of the things I've always been conscious of, and I'm still doing it, and I'm pretty sure I've done it on this podcast, is that I've got a tendency to waffle. I've got a tendency to waffle and perhaps slightly go off tangent very quickly. Pretty sure like episodes of Always On Smallville that I've been on have been running at least 2 hours. And like I think I've done the podcast, but I think one of the key things that I really striving to do, and I'm hoping has come across, particularly with is like my own personal learning arc of the podcast, as well as perhaps discovering music and getting more knowledgeable about it as I'm doing the podcast, is that my tendency to like mumble and speak on the microphone has gotten a lot better than it has been. So I'm pretty sure that if because I remember listening back to the 2015 version of Pick a Disc with Murder Ballads, and then my elocution's still rubbish. I'm from the Black Country in the West Midlands, so I'm never going to be well spoken.
I'm from the mumbling Cumbria, so we're both in the same kind of boat, to be honest.
But the accent your accent gives you a bit of flair.
Yeah, I suppose.
Yeah, and whenever I hear anyone from where I live, we all sound a bit dumb, like, you know. So like, it's like, yeah, we listened to a CD once, didn't we? Yeah. It had songs on it. Yeah, it's not the best accent, if you're completely honest. But one of the aims as well is for me to kind of get better at speaking and to like put my thoughts forward. And I do feel a lot more confident. I think a lot of it actually is that I've actually started to sit more straight when I'm doing a podcast as well. So if we're going to go a bit more technical, I think that my kind of posture's changed when I, like the last few months of particular, and like how your voice gets carried and
I've never really confidence stuff. You're the first one to mention that. Actually, I've never really thought about that. I mean, coming from a musical background myself, and obviously, you know, sing. Well, I don't sing, but I have sung in the past, and you know, I know our lead singer has had those lessons, and you know, and we know musical teachers and things like that, so we know quite a lot about, you know, the diaphragm and how to speak and various other things, and it's in management techniques as well. But I've never really thought about it from a podcasting point of view. So that's a good discussion point, that actually, because it does. I mean, I've naturally changed the way that I have my microphone set up, and it's purely because of a technical reason, and the fact that I now podcast in other places now. So I have to have this set up so I can easily unplug it and plug it out. Whereas before I might have been more slumped and stuff like that, where now I tend to sit up a little bit more and talk straight. So yeah, I think that's really interesting and a really good piece for anyone who's listening, who does do podcasting, that they want to improve. I think that's definitely something to bear in mind. Yeah,
well, because like now the majority of my podcasts are set up as I am now, so I'm sat down talking into a condenser Yeti Pro mic set to, I think, get the sound forward.
Yeah.
I mean, like,
as if you're talking through your teeth.
Yes, kind of, like that. But a couple of times now, particularly since I've finally moved out into my own home, a couple of times, I think, actually about 2 or 3 times, I've had podcast recordings downstairs in the living room, where I've used that Zoom 4N, but I've used two like shotgun mics.
Right.
So like the guest will sit on like the comfy settee, and I'll sit on my powang and stuff, and we'll talk like in person, and that's only happened about 3 times. 3 times. There's been 2 other times. I think one time I recorded at Tony's house, and I was at my friend and myself and Tilly, who was episode 9, also recorded in person. But one of the things I always wanted to try, but I've never been in a position to, was perhaps record a podcast over Skype, but when I'm standing up.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Purely because I don't know whether the fact that I'm standing up means I'm perhaps more animated and stuff, and whether that will project confidence or not, or at least I don't know what's the word I'm thinking of. Means that inside of me that controls the voice will be in a different position, or at least less strained than I am sitting down. Because at the moment particularly the last 10 minutes, my back is actually now straight rather than slumped back. So, and I'll be interested to know if anyone's listened is whether the last 10 minutes that's changed actually.
Yeah, well, it would be interesting. I mean, I think that the one thing it's good that it's an open discussion with, you know, we're very much in similar boats really. That as I say, I tend to mumble a lot, and I do like I just did then. But I used to say ers a hell of a lot when I first started. And
I still do.
Yeah, I still do. But it's not as pronounced as it used to be. It used to be every other word. And one of the things I was going to ask you with a couple of things that you've mentioned there, and my comfort zone, and saying about being out your comfort zone, and I think it depends on the person as well. Because when I actually speak to Tony, I don't feel this way. Certain people that and that's no thing on them. It's just the way that I react. Is that I feel more comfortable in a host chair than I do in a guest chair. I tend to prefer to be in control of the conversation and direct it where I need to direct it, and formulate my thoughts while the other guest is speaking. Now, me and Tony are doing the Star Trek Picard podcast, but I feel that it feels more natural for us. It feels more conversational, and him as a guest, me being a guest on that, and we're both co-hosts, but he's running it at the moment until the show starts, that I feel that the conversation tends to roll more. And I think that the chemistry, I think that's a big part of it. And basically my long way of saying this is you've done a lot of hosting and you've been guest a few times in various different things. Is where do you feel more comfortable in that? And do you think that you would want to develop more on which side of the fence you would want to develop?
Both, I think, but it will depend on the subject matter in question. Yeah. I mean, like, because I can't. I mean, like, I think quite a few of the episodes of the Xcast I've been on. I think some episodes I've enjoyed more than others.
Yeah.
Space. But again, I think I felt like I've got into it, enjoyed doing them. But the X-Files isn't like I'm not much of an X-Files massive fan. I pretty much was like a newbie to the X-Files.
Yeah.
Whilst I was been on there, which I think, which at the time, or looking back on it, I think was like a fresh dynamic. I think, considering quite a lot, particularly with how community based it's gone now.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of super fans. I like to think that the guest I was quite like a diamond in the rough. Or at least something different because I was more of a newbie in terms of it. But like, for example, the hosting chair a bit. Some episodes I'm much more comfortable getting the guest to talk, particularly if it's an album that I'm not, or an artist I'm not too familiar with, because so I can get them to talk about it more or elaborate it more. And stuff. Some episodes the artist and the album are ones that I know. There's at least 2 instances where the guests have picked two like my favourite albums of all time.
Right.
So it was a lot more of a back and forth, and I was able to contribute more. And like, there's one episode, I think it was when Helen, the second one actually, where she talks about Slow Club. Slow Club, one of my favourite bands, and but she chose her favourite album out of their 4, but it was my least favourite.
Right.
So that was a kind of a different dynamic for that one than like the Phoebe Bridgers one. But we had like a lot of common things to talk about in terms of, particularly with the nature of the band being like 2 people and how different they are and stuff. And like, and it turned out naturally that she favoured the one member of the band, but I favoured the other, and that kind of stuff.
Right, okay.
But see, and for this podcast as well, actually, because the subject is me.
Yeah.
I know a lot about that subject. Probably not as much as I probably do, like rap lyrics of 90s pop songs. But but I think that, again, because I'm quite knowledgeable of the subject of Matt Latham himself, I feel a lot more confident in talking about that. So
yeah.
Whereas perhaps if I was on like, again, perhaps the Xcast, where my knowledge of the thing might just be that episode or that moment in time, and I don't have like years of decades of a rewatch.
Yeah.
Of rewatches to be able to boost my memory of it, then perhaps my confidence might not be as good as that.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I think that the thing for guesting for me on various different podcasts that even if I have knowledge on stuff, there's certain avenues where it might go down a different path to where I was expecting it to, where I think that I'm more of a person who likes to be in a bit more control. So when you're thinking, oh, right, okay, I'm going to talk about this particular subject. We'll take the X-Files, for example, that on episode I probably wasn't even on, so let's just say Paper Hearts or whatever, that I would know what that episode was about. I'd watch it again, I'd make my notes, but then it would go down a different path and it'd be like, oh, okay, and it'd become a bit more, well, I don't really, I like it because of this, not because of that, and it would be difficult to control it. And I think that I feel that I'm naturally more of a host, directing the conversation, responding, listening to what people are saying, and try and pull it into the positions that they might like it, and get them to talk. So yeah, I definitely think it's good from that point of view. Coming back to the podcast a little bit with regards to the subject matter of music and the fact that you have your guests on that discuss the music. I mean, Achtung Baby, you've already mentioned that you didn't know too much about U2 and haven't listened really to that album. This is not for me going, oh, this is, we really enjoyed it. But over the episodes that you've seen, that you've listened, that you've done, is there anything over the course of those that you've kind of really been surprised at, or you've enjoyed an album which you wouldn't have necessarily listened to? And I know that's the whole reason for it in some ways, but has there been anything that really jumped out at you and made you think about something in a different way? And the reverse being true as well, that if you've listened to an album and you've not particularly liked it from the guest.
The Limp Bizkit one comes to mind. This is the second one, but then again, that was because I think that was the first time I listened to the album properly. I mean, there was singles and stuff, and I probably got more detail in the actual Limp Bizkit episode itself, in that there are parts of it, not many, that I quite liked, and I think it kind of reinforced that idea that I probably wouldn't like it myself. I did try to skew the conversation more into why Chris liked it, and I think from that episode, but my learning experience from that was to try and make the episodes more about why the guests like it and their personal stuff about it, rather than trying being critical of it. But then again, there hasn't been many or any albums that I've really disliked listening to. I've enjoyed listening to quite majority of them. Some more than others. I mean, again, I think the Phoebe Bridgers one, episode 3, that album is actually amazing, and I've listened to it a lot. I do keep meaning to listen to more Bright Eyes. And that was the 4th episode. But in fact, one of the key things that I quite like is that Phoebe Bridgers, if you don't know, she's like a singer-songwriter. She's like 23, 24, I think. And I listened to that album. It was really great. We recorded the episode. A day or two later.
Yeah, I was going to bring this up, but go for it, yeah.
A day or two later, it turns out that she is joining a supergroup with Connor Oberst from Bright Eyes, and Bright Eyes was my 4th episode. And it was like we already recorded the episode, so we couldn't talk about it. So I talked about it with Colin from the 4th one, and I ended up listening to the Better Oblivion Community Centre, which is the name of the supergroup album, quite a lot, and it became my 3rd favourite album of the year. And one of the mini episodes that I recorded at the end of the year was about that album, and it was kind of like magical about that as well. And one of the things that kept coming up was I've particularly with Colin from We Dig Music, who you've interviewed on the past, and he's been on quite. I think he's like so far the only person who's appeared on Pick a Disc 3 times, I think, so far. Said that he discovered Phoebe Bridgers because of this podcast as well, and I quite like that. So I've not heard much feedback in terms of if people have discovered albums or found albums because of the podcast yet. That's the only one I really think of. I've not really had much criticism. No, actually, saying that, I did have one piece of criticism on Instagram about the Jimmy Eat World episode where I find it quite funny. Oh, it's more of a general coffee shop talk. The one guy didn't know anything about Jimmy Eat World and Jimmy Eat World and blah 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 blah. And I was listening to that saying, yeah, I point out at the very start. I'm pretty sure, yeah. But I think because of that, I'm definitely because of that. I think every episode now there's a section that I now add just before we start talking about my disclosure and my history of the band, just to be on the safe side, to make sure that people listening know that, no, I've never listened to him before. I've never listened to Tame Impala before. Yes, I have listened to Amy Stud before.
Yeah, I think that's only good, really, because I think that you might get people who are coming in just to listen to that album, and they might not have listened to the episodes beforehand, do they? And having that knowledge that, you know, the reason why you're doing the episode to reinforce that most episodes, it would be a good thing to do.
Yeah, and I think the stats that I used to look at kind of reflect that, actually. So, like, I think some people will probably think, oh, I've never listened to that album, or I don't know who they are, so they'll skip one. So it's which I'm fine with, because I'm pretty sure there are podcasts that I've either listened to in past, or if I don't know the song or I'm not too fond of the subject matter, I'll not listen to that episode. And I'm guaranteed it's going to be the same for mine as well. But that's the nature of kind of an episodic, kind of the nature of the episodic stuff, because it's just me and a guest. There's the only real coherent or concurrent element that will go through each, apart from like the odd few phrases and like references to each other in previous episodes, is me. Whereas like where you've got like other podcasts with similar premises, like there's one called Flawless, which is very similar, but the idea being is that guests or the hosts come on and talk about it, but they've got 3 regular hosts, which kind of some turn up, some don't, and sometimes they have a guest, but they have a lot more of a concurrent thread of stuff going through, so it invites more listening to each episode. And a podcast I've just discovered, actually, which is very similar, called Play Disc, which is very similar to mine, but is just the same 2 people talking about albums. I think a lot, because it's just the 2 people, then I think a lot of the value of that is probably because you're listening to the 2 people interacting about the album. So you probably want to get more people. So there might be a case that people are going to be listening to each episode more than just random ones, whereas this one,
I don't think. I mean, you're always going to be able to attract people who are listening it for yourself, and obviously the subject matter, and people who are interested in music in general and things. But it's the same with this one, is that you're going to get people like the Doctor Who one, for example, has a massive. With the big blue blocks from last year, that's probably, I haven't looked at my stats recently, but that's probably one of the bigger ones. Because it's got such a big fan base, and they have brought their fandom over to listen to that episode. And you know, the projection booth obviously is a massive one as well. So, but then you've got the other people who do listen to every episode that I've put out, and you know, it'd be nice to find out who those people are. But at the same time, you know, you've got that it's almost like a, you know, you've got your standard listens, and then you've got the people who will come in and almost give like a wave of people that will come because of the subject matter. And I think that you might have the same element with yours as well, but I think that you still will have those music connoisseurs who are appreciating the music that you do, because the music is so eclectic, that because of the people choosing it, that, you know, it's not all about sort of popular music. There's elements of, you know, there's sort of, you got your Limp Bizkit and U2s like mine and Chris's, but you've got other things like you know, going back to Tony, Lemon Jelly on his, and other shows where there's people that I might not have heard of before, and you know, a bit more eclectic in that way. And I think that's it's a really good thing to do, and I think that people who enjoy music will actually enjoy that more.
Yeah, like for example, I think one of the 6th episode with a friend of mine called Mark, not the same Mark who was involved in Raven, still a completely different person. He chose a New Jersey band called Brick and Mortar, and it was just like an extended EP, and that was pretty much a like a very small band. Dan O'Dell chose he's like one of his best friend's albums to do. B-sides, and it was like probably one of the first episodes where there wasn't a Wikipedia article for me to nick stuff off. Yeah, right. But he chose his friend's album because he wanted to talk about it and because he loves the album, and it's completely under the remit of the of the rules of that. I mean, like, for example, so far this year, an episode that has, in inverted commas, already aired, which hasn't been recorded yet as time of recording, already pushes the concept of the thing, because I think Tony's second appearance that I'm sure you've listened to after the time of recording, because I'm recording it this Saturday. He chose the soundtrack to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a movie soundtrack, but it's still an album. It's still covered by the disc and stuff. So, and because I've been in talks with other people to perhaps do kind of albums that aren't traditional albums. So, like, for example, movie soundtracks. Yeah, has cropped up a few times. So.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the questions I was going to ask, actually, because there's certain albums, even like sort of there was one early 90s, which was the Q album, where there was a collection of songs with like Richard Ashcroft and things like that I wouldn't necessarily maybe suggest, but it was, as growing up, it was something that was on all the time because it was just a compilation of great music that I loved, and you knew the song listing in that order pretty much by heart because you would listen to it all the time. So yeah, it's interesting that it's going in that direction.
Yeah, well, no one's picked a compilation yet, but it'd be at least an episode to try if it works or not, because if anything, compilations like that are time capsules of a certain era.
Yeah, they are.
But a better example of that would probably be if you go back to Colin from We Dig Music. He's got a second podcast called Free With This Month's Issue.
Yes.
That kind of goes through cover discs from magazines, and that's a lot more of a time capsule type thing as well.
Yeah. Coming soon to pick up a podcast. Yeah, we seem to be going around in the same circles. But yeah, I mean, I think that the majority of the stuff that you've talked about so far has been great. The one thing I wanted to pick up on is your editing. How has your editing changed a lot since the beginning of your podcasting journey when you've done the edits, and how would you kind of approach that?
It's not changed that much. I mean, what's usually from about episode 4 or 5 is when, and it's pretty much been the same. The only slight difference is from about episode 20, but I'll get to in a second. Basically, get the Skype call. If they've got a local recording, use that. I'll use my local recording, sync it up, mute the Skype call, do a noise reduction filter on the thing, because there's always a 10-second gap. I always ask I'll count down from 5 and have a 10-second gap of silence before I cut in with like the kind of like ice breaking, like it's supposed to be like a mid-conversation thing, but I've never done it that way, because I've seen other podcasts do it where they seem to fade into mid-conversation. I've never been able to work that in properly yet. Then like kind of just like edit it as it is. Sometimes I've been doing like a compressor and adding like a bass boost and a treble boost because it adds a bit more life to the stuff, and then pretty much render, export, add the theme tune, add the intro and the outro, and that's it. When Colin came to my house to do the second map pick where I talked about the streets, he told me of a program called Levelator. Right. Yep. Which way, like, if you just throw it in, it will do the compression and normalization straight away. Now I've been doing that, but I've been noticing recently there's kind of like a weird phase kind of effect sometimes on the actual recordings when I started listening back to them. Right. Okay. Because I've stopped listening back to them now, because I used to listen to each episode when they aired, but I've not really had much of the time, so I don't really listen to them back anymore after I've edited them. Mainly because after editing them, I do kind of want to, I'll put it to bed and say, yeah, that's done, I can schedule it, it's done, and I've just got too many other podcasts to listen to now. I don't want to listen to my voice again. But then I think I'm starting to experiment to perhaps try and do less post-processing before editing, and perhaps try using the Levelator afterwards, and if need be. Right, yeah. Yeah, because I'm going to try and, because I am going to start trying perhaps tweak a bit more with the post effects later on, because because I don't know whether doing the compressor on the different tracks and then putting it through another compressor is causing something issues. So
yeah, it might well do, because the compressor will bring your gate on the floor. So if you've got like noise which you're naturally bringing up because of the compression, and then you're compressing it again and doing it slightly different, it might take some frequencies out or add some frequencies in and things.
Yeah,
so
but the software doesn't have a noise reduction thing, so I've done the noise reduction. I just haven't done any compressor on it, so I might try that first, because I'm currently editing the 30th episode, so I'm going to try that and see if that solves that issue. But other than that, it is pretty much been a lot of the same thing. It's just doing the just basically going through. I've now got keyboard shortcuts in Audacity where if the noise reduction hasn't removed a lot of the background noise on the guest who isn't talking, I'll just highlight big chunks of it and do a generate silence, which will mute.
Control L.
Is that it?
I found this out a couple of weeks ago. I saw it on Twitter.
I just created it. It's like Control Shift and W for me. I just created a new one from scratch.
Oh, right. I think there's a controller now, because I had an issue with my Audacity, which I'll leave in this podcast just because it's one of those things where, and I've changed laptops since then. I'm actually using my work laptop at the moment, but when I was generating silence, it was crashing the computer, so I couldn't generate silence. So what I was doing was amplifying it and then just bringing the amplification right down to make the silence effectively. But then I saw something on Twitter. This was maybe only 3-4 weeks ago, and they said the shortcut for silencing a section, not generating silence, just like silencing. You as you say, you drag over and select your area. You Control L, and it silences that section.
Oh, and okay. The other slight little tool that I sometimes use as well is the truncate silence.
Right. Okay.
So sometimes where there's gaps and stuff, and basically it'll shave a few seconds off thing where someone's talking, particularly me as well, and there's gaps and stuff. I'll just highlight a chunk of talking, truncate the silence, and it'll just remove a lot of unnatural gaps.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Or, well, natural gaps, if I'm honest, but it kind of makes things think. So if I'm kind of going and thinking of stuff as I'm talking, so sometimes where you're trying to compress all your thoughts before you speak and everything, there's that gap where someone's trying to think of what they're saying, and there's those kind of gaps and spaces between speak. Yeah, that truncated silence kind of cuts that down, so it makes things a bit more. It feels a lot more natural, so you don't hear me. You don't hear the brain process and trying to work out what to say and stuff. And it's like a nice little hack that kind of, if anything, shaves time, because I've always tried to get each episode underneath an hour. I've failed a few times, but
well, as you say that, we're approaching 1 hour 30 minutes. Currently,
I told you a rabbit on.
It's fine. Obviously, I will be editing this down, so it won't be quite that. When you do hear this, it'll probably be slightly less than that. But I think finally, just before we go, how do you listen to podcasts then? Because you're an avid podcast listener. What is your kind of go-to? How do you listen to podcasts over the course of the days and weeks that you do listen to other ones?
It used to be Pocket Casts, but then they had an update and it just ruined it. So I found a new app called Podcast Republic, which is an Android-based one. And basically I basically play it through my phone. Now I've got a Bluetooth stereo that's in my kitchen, but I've also got a couple of Google Assistant speakers, Wi-Fi speakers are in the house that I can probably send stuff to. So if I want to put something on in the background, I can either put music on or I put podcasts on. But the main kind of thing that I listen to is when I'm driving to and from work. Right, I'll put podcasts on and driving. And I'll put podcasts on because it makes journeys a lot quicker and easier. But I also listen to podcasts while I'm running, because I can't listen to music. I used to, but for some reason, and it's okay. But I think if you listen to podcasts whilst running, if particularly when I was able to run longer because I've been injured for a while. It's nice to be able to run for about an hour and a half, or an hour and 40 minutes, doing 10 miles. But then if you've got something in your ears and you've got the podcast going, then that works. Because when I used to do my long Sunday runs, they that was pretty much the time I listened to TV Talk Machine and the Retro Hour, and pretty much any others that come after it. So like so that was like my like Sunday
Right.
podcast listening was always dedicated. So when I was going to go for a run, because that's when I would listen to those two podcasts. If I was running on my own during the midweek, I'll just put podcasts on again, just to, it helps pass the time, and you can kind of gauge stuff. So if you know that a podcast is like half an hour long, and I always listen at 1.3 speed. I've got no idea why that time. That's it. Anything slower, it feels like you're in the Matrix. Anything faster, if anything faster, sounds like you're fast forwarding you're pressing play and fast forward at the same time on a cassette. But yeah, so I'll always listen to like 1.3 and like more or less like, and kind of gauge how long a podcast would be, and I can do like a 10k and listen to this podcast by the time I finish and stuff. And
good stuff. Yeah, I mean, I think the talking about truncating silence, I don't do it that often on podcasts, but there's certain ones where I enjoy the podcast itself, but not to the degree that it feels natural. So sometimes I'll actually truncate the silence within the apps themselves. That I'll just like sort of and play that slightly faster. But it's very rare that I would speed it up. But yeah, that's an interesting one. That. And finally, before we go into where we can find you, if you were to point somebody in the direction of an album at the moment, what album are you listening to, and what album would you suggest people give a go?
Well, see, we are currently like listening to this in January. No, sorry.
Yeah, so we're recording this in January. Yes. So.
Yes, so we are recording this in January. So I might put two, if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so I'll probably point people in the direction of my number one album of last year, which is Teen Girl Scientist Monthly, and the album Anxiety League, which is just basically brilliant fun indie pop. And and they recently put a post on Instagram saying that because they're not much of a big band, but they're quite, but they've said thank you for putting them as number one of my favourite albums. That was quite nice of them.
All right, yeah.
And the album I've listened to a lot this month, so far for 2012, that I'm not covering for the podcast, is a band called the Manimals, and the album's called Multiverse. And I think that they pretty much because I've been listening to Teen Girl Scientist Monthly a lot, that they're quite based in like a New York indie pop scene, and this band was showing up saying, "Oh, if you like so and so, you'll like these." And the man, so this song's like really really good, kind of like email like indie pop kind of like rock stuff.
Right. Yeah.
They've got a previous album that was like a concept album on songs influenced by Game of Thrones, and they've played Game of Thrones based conventions and stuff, where they've sang their songs written about like concept albums based on it and stuff. And yeah, and it's a really good album that I quite like. I think it was the first album that I listened to this year.
Great stuff. Right, okay, so well, Matt, thank you very much for giving us insight into both yourself and obviously our master and leader, who's omnipresent, probably looking over us right now, Tony Black.
I'm gonna get messy from you now. What did you say that?
Yeah,
for?
What did you say that for? I'm hopefully going to get Tony on at some point, so he can by all means spread the goss on yourself and reciprocate quite well. But until the meantime, if people are really interested in listening to your podcast, where can they find that, and where can they find you online?
Well, we're on all your favoured podcast apps of choice. We're on Apple Podcasts, we're on Podcast Republic, which is my podcast of choice. A lot of people seem to listen to us on listen to me on Spotify. Pretty much any place that has podcasts, we're on there. And if not, let us know. You can find us on the social medias, all under Pick a Disc. We've got a Facebook group, which you can probably find as well. And always welcome new members, because there haven't been any for a while.
Let's get some more on there.
Yeah, get some more in. Got a Facebook page, but the main things I'm active on are on Twitter and on Instagram. So the most likely able to, if you want to interact with me and tell me that I'm wrong on certain albums, feel free to.
Fantastic. Well, Matt, thank you very much for coming on. I'll be looking forward. Hopefully, I'll be on yours again in the future, and so look out for that as well. And until next time, everyone, thank you very much for coming back for season 2. I've got quite a few interesting guests, some of which we might have even sort of half mentioned on this one today, and some really interesting podcasts that are going to come up during season 2, which I'm really looking forward to. There's certain ones that I won't mention just now, but you will find them as we go along. So thank you very much for coming online, and Matt, again, thank you. And until next time, everyone, enjoy your podcasting, and we'll see you soon.